Fall at Equestria, M.I.A. by CivilWarPony. Read by Forrest M. Chapter 4. A Calamitous Affair. The following morning, Airborne awoke to see Spitfire cooking breakfast, with Soren already chowing down on a plate of pancakes drenched in maple syrup. Airborne smiled and laughs as he watches Soren greedily eat the pancakes with maple syrup running down his cheeks. Soren's ears perk up and swivel in Airborne's direction. He says, "I'd like to see you go 2 centuries without having a decent breakfast." Spitfire hands Airborne a hot plate of pancakes and says, "A soldier can't get far on an empty stomach." Airborne thanks her and takes the plate, quickly devouring the pancakes. Airborne, after eating, takes apart all Equestrian and cleans the weapon while Soren stands over his shoulder, telling him what cleaning products he should use to keep the gun in tip-top condition. After cleaning his weapon, Airborne checks his battle saddle and cleans the ghoul blood off his armor. Outside the barn, a dust storm had begun whipping itself into a fury as it approached the ruined farm. Sunrise's pitbuck began to beep loudly. Firestreak looks at her and says, "What the heck is that noise?" She replies, "That storm is highly radioactive. My pitbuck alerts me when there are unsafe levels of radiation nearby, so I recommend that we leave soon. Otherwise, I don't think I have enough Radaway to safely cleanse every pony." Soren stretches his wings and says, "So, not only do we have to worry about ghouls and raiders, but also radiation too." Airborne replies, "Welcome to the wasteland." Flying ahead of the storm, the ponies make their way over the tomb, passing over the endless reminders of the destruction that destroyed Equestria. Spitfire looks at the remains of the ancient battlefields and long-ago ruins of villages with names forgotten to the past, shaking her head, saying, "This place used to be so beautiful before the war, but now look at it. I wish the war had never happened." Airborne looks at the ruins below, saying, "It isn't all bad down there. Many of those who live in the waste help each other out as best as they can, and most of the time, it's peaceful. But we know that things could be better. So we do what we can to help Equestria recover from the mistakes of the past that no pony can undo. So dwelling on it isn't going to help things, Spitfire." Spitfire stops looking at the ruins below and replies, "Still, it doesn't make it any easier knowing we could have stopped this from happening." Pulling on his filtration mask, Airborne says to Soren, "When we get back to New Cloudsdale, you might want to purchase one of these things. They're really handy out here in the wastelands." He watches as Soren pulls out a tan piece of cloth with black checkerboard stitching out of his saddlebags and wraps it around his face, saying, "No need. This thing will keep out any nasty stuff floating around in the air out here." Airborne replies, "I guess it will." As they continue to fly over the wastelands below, Airborne notices that a dust storm behind them is approaching rapidly. He says, "We better hurry. That storm system looks nasty." Airborne flaps his wings harder and flies ahead of the group, scouting out any place they might have to make an emergency landing in case of the storm. But before he can find a safe place to land, the storm overtakes the group of ponies. Airborne's eyes sting as the dust whips across his face. Squinting through the dust and debris, a dark outline appears in front of him. Approaching the building, Airborne recognizes it as an old factory they had stayed in before on their way to Marston. He yells up to his friends, "Down here! There's a place we can stay in and wait for the storm to blow over." Starshine, Bailout, and Sunrise land first, followed by Soren and Spitfire with Fleetfoot, Firestreak, and Mistyfly right behind them. Trotting into the factory, Firestreak and Fleetfoot enter first, checking each room to make sure it's safe. As they enter the upstairs office space, 2 gunshots ring out and strike the doorframe above them, splintering the ancient wood into a pale brown dust that lingers in the air like a mist. Taking cover behind the wall, Firestreak calls out, "Hold your fire! We mean you no harm!" Looking at the floor, Firestreak notices drops of blood. Peering around the corner into the room, he sees an overturned desk and a pony behind it, aiming his battle saddle at the doorway with 2 brown eyes intensely focused on his targets. The silver brim of the pony's hat is pushed back on his head. Firestreak can hear the pony's ragged breathing. From what he can tell, this pony is wounded badly. 2 rust-colored feathers lie on the floor next to the desk. The pony holds his wounded wing close to his body as he readies himself for the expected attack from the 2 Pegasi outside of the doorway. Firestreak says, "I can hear you breathing in there, and I can see you're wounded. Let us help you. We mean you no harm." The rust-colored Pegasus replies, Yep, heard that one before. Y'all just stay in there, you hear? Otherwise I'll be forced to fill you full of holes." Fleetfoot looks at Firestreak, saying, "This pony isn't messing around. Let's just kill him. We can't afford to have some crazy pony running around in here while we sleep. I have some grenades in my saddlebags. I could toss one in and it would be over in a few seconds." Firestreak shakes his head, saying, "No, that isn't right. Besides, I get the feeling this pony doesn't want to hurt us. Otherwise, he would have killed us by now. His aim is pretty dead on. I have no doubt he would have blown my brains out when I stepped hoof into the room. Instead, he fired at the doorframe. Something doesn't add up." Firestreak grabs the strap to his battle saddle in his mouth and pulls on it. The heavy saddle rolls off his back, landing on the floor with a loud thud. Fleetfoot's eyes widen in surprise, and she says, "What are you doing? Have you completely lost your mind, Firestreak?" He looks at her, saying, "I'm going in there to help that pony. I don't think he'll shoot me, and if he does, then you can kill him afterwards. Besides, if I'm dead, I won't have to live in this hellish world any longer." Firestreak cautiously enters the room, saying, "I mean you no harm. I'm not armed, so let me help you." The brown Pegasus replies, "Don't you come any closer, or I will blow you to pieces, alright?" Firestreak stops halfway between the doorway and the middle of the room, saying, "My name is Firestreak. What is your name?" The rust-colored Pegasus ears perk forward, and he slightly lowers the barrels of his battle saddle, saying, "My name is Calamity." Firestreak smiles, saying, "Nice to meet you, Calamity. So, you think I can come over and dress your wounds for you?" Calamity looks at Firestreak, and as he is about to reply, he slumps to the floor, unconscious. Firestreak quickly calls over to Fleetfoot. They carry Calamity's unconscious body downstairs, clean and dress his wounds before he further injures himself. Airborne looks at Firestreak, saying, "Are you sure? This pony told you his name was Calamity?" Firestreak shakes his head, saying, "Yeah, that's what he said to me. Why? Who is he?" Airborne replies, "He is one of Little Pip's best friends. He helped bring peace to Equestria, although I have no idea why he's out here in the first place. We can't afford to let him die. Otherwise, I could never face Fluttershy again." Misty Fly replies, "Well, I don't think you have to worry about that. As bad as his wounds are, he'll live." Airborne breathes out a sigh of relief and sits next to Starshine, leaning against her. She smiles at him, saying, "Don't worry, we'll take care of him. I'm sure you'll have 1,000 questions for him when he wakes up." After a few hours, Calamity stirs. Sitting up, he looks around the room at the strange group of Pegasi. He notices a few of them are in uniforms he'd seen in old propaganda posters from the Great War, while the other 4 are armed with a collection of both old and modern firearms. One of the Pegasi in particular catches his attention. He is a young Pegasus with charcoal gray coat and blue eyes. His mane and tail are brown with black streaks. His cutie mark is a white parachute with a yellow star attached to it. In his travels, since Little Pip entered the SPP, he had heard stories of a young Dashite who had risked everything to find Rainbow Dash, and how this Pegasus named Airborne had defeated the Enclave's renewed activity in Equestria. He even managed to survive the detonation of an experimental balefire bomb. Calamity smiles, looking at his bandages, saying, "Thanks for, patching me up. You must be Airborne. I can't go anywhere without some pony talking about you." Airborne scratches the back of his mane and blushes in embarrassment, then says, "I didn't know that you heard about me, Calamity. So, what are you doing out here anyways?" Calamity replies, "After you pony folk left New Cloudsdale, Rainbow Dash asked me to meet with her. To be honest, I thought it was going to be some random pony that made themselves look like Rainbow Dash. So when I opened that door, my jaw just about hit the floor. She told me to go after you since you didn't arrive back when expected. So she sent me to look for you, but now that I've found you, I can return to New Cloudsdale to tell every pony that you're all right. In the meantime, I need y'all to move your feathers and get back to New Cloudsdale as soon as possible." Calamity gets up off the floor and winces a bit as he stretches his wings. Airborne looks at him, saying, "Who did that to you?" Calamity replies, "Just some low-down, dirty red remnant ponies. They must have figured me for one of you and shot me as soon as I passed overhead. But I took care of them once they revealed their position. Once I sat down on a target, there's no escape." Calamity smiles and waves goodbye to Airborne and company, then flaps his wings, soaring high into the air, and disappears into the dust storm. As Sunrise and Starshine cook dinner, Airborne and Soren practice shooting inside of the factory's target range. Firestreak and Mistyfly stand guard while Spitfire and Fleetfoot take stock of the supplies taken from Stable 200. With the storm finally blowing itself out, Airborne is told by Sunrise they can leave safely. Putting all Equestrian away on his back, Airborne trots out of the target range and down the main hall of the factory. The storm had blown in significant amounts of dust into the factory. The walls and floor coated with a fine powder that stirred when Airborne's hooves trotted over it, causing it to swirl in the air. Trotting outside of the factory, Airborne stretches his wings and says, "It's a good day to fly. There isn't a cloud anywhere in the sky, and there doesn't appear to be any bad weather on the horizon." Soren trots up next to him, saying, "With no cloud cover will be easier to spot, especially to any pony that wants to cause us harm." Starshine replies, "Well then, we should just hurry as Calamity said and not linger around here any longer. Besides, if we get attacked, we can spot them just as easily as they can." The group of ponies leave the old factory behind as they soar into the sky and towards the direction of New Cloudsdale. As they approach New Cloudsdale, Soren begins to fidget nervously. Both Spitfire and Airborne look at him with concern, saying, "What's wrong, Soren?" Soren looks at them, his green eyes darting around as he looks at the other ponies flying next to him, saying, "It's been so long since I've seen Rainbow Dash. What if she doesn't recognize me, or doesn't feel for me the same way she did before?" Airborne replies, "I wouldn't worry about that, Soren. If she didn't feel the same way about you, why would she have bothered to give me the photograph of you and her before the war?" The clouds roll back and New Cloudsdale comes into view. The Wonderbolts look at the city in awe that something like this still exists within Equestria. Spitfire says, "It looks like Cloudsdale, but it doesn't feel like Cloudsdale." Airborne replies, "We've done our best to give the Pegasi living here some sense of normalcy compared to the wastelands below. This place is paradise. We know we can never recover what was lost during the war, but this is a good place to start to rebuild this shattered world one piece at a time." Airborne leads the Wonderbolts towards the new academy named after them. As they approach, he sees every cadet in neat ranks standing on parade grounds, each one with polished brass buttons and belt buckles, wearing their blue uniforms that make them look like an ocean in the sky. Landing amongst them, all of the cadets raise their right forehooves to their brows and salute as the Wonderbolts pass them by. At the far end of the ranks of the ponies stands Rainbow Dash, her old armor polished brightly with the sunlight glinting off of it. Soren gallops up to her and smiles, saying, "It's, been a while, huh, Rainbow Dash?" Rainbow Dash nods and says, "It's been too long, Soren. You look good for being stuck in a freezer for 200 years. Soren chuckles and replies, "Well, that's one of the benefits of freezing yourself. You don't gain any weight." Rainbow Dash leans over and kisses Soren on the cheek, saying softly, "We will have time to discuss us later, but I'm glad to see you're still in one piece." Soren blushes and replies, "And you're still awesome after all this time." Rainbow Dash says, "Of course. What would you expect? Awesome and Rainbow Dash go together rather well." Airborne and his friends have their load of weapons removed from their saddlebags by several cadet ponies. Trotting up to Rainbow Dash, he says, "Well, we're back, and we brought you all the weapons and ammo we could carry from Stable 200. Rainbow Dash thanks Airborne and trots over to Spitfire, saying, "It's been a while, Commander. I hope we can count upon you for what's to come." Spitfire salutes and replies, "You can count on us, Rainbow Dash." Sitting inside of his home in New Cloudsdale, Airborne takes off his battle saddle, rolling his shoulders. Pulling out all equestrian from his saddlebags, he places the weapon inside of a gun locker and stores his battle saddle away with it, then puts both Gust and Thunder inside as well. Trotting to the kitchen, he sees Starshine sitting at a table with a plate of Daisy sandwiches. She looks at him, saying, "About time you got home. Where have you been?" Airborne sits down in the chair across from her, saying, "I was meeting with Rainbow Dash in her office, finalizing the plans for the assault on Red Remnant's headquarters in Colt Paulus." Starshine pushes her chair closer to his, saying, "So, what's the plan? Charge in through the front entrance with guns blazing?" Airborne sighs, saying, "It's gonna be rough. From what Rainbow Dash told me, the Red Remnants have fortified the entire city. So even when we attack, we're gonna lose a lot of ponies. And I don't know if I have the strength to get us through to the end safely." Starshine nuzzles him and replies, "If there is any pony crazy enough to get us through to the end, it's you, Airborne. After all, you did survive the Titan's hammer when it blew up." Airborne gets up from his chair and trots away from her, saying, "This is serious, Starshine. This isn't going to be like last time. These Red Remnant ponies aren't pushovers like the Enclave was. They are going to kill a lot of ponies before we're done with them. If there is one thing I cannot stand, it's watching ponies die needlessly, especially young ones like Bailout and Sunrise being torn to shreds." Starshine trots to his side and says, "Well, then we shall have to watch our backs and every pony's else as well. We will get through this, Airborne. Don't you worry about it." Airborne smiles and nuzzles her, then trots out of the kitchen, heading to bed. The next morning, Airborne heard a knock at his front door. Trotting downstairs and pulling open the door to find both Soren and Bailout standing there. Soren replies, "Can we come in? I figured eating breakfast here was a lot better than eating in the Academy mess hall." Airborne blinks and yawns, saying, "I guess. Come on in." Soren trots in and says, "Nice place you got here. I definitely dig the old Wonderbolt poster. I'd forgotten what those looked like after all these years." Trotting into the kitchen, Soren sees Starshine cooking breakfast in a pink robe, and she looks at him and says, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here?" As Airborne trots into the room, she says, So, I guess I'm cooking breakfast for Soren and Bailout? Airborne shrugs, then starts to make himself some coffee. As Starshine puts down the first helping of pancakes, Soren jabs a fork into the stack of steamy plate and transfers its content onto his own plate, then slathers the hot cakes in maple syrup. As Starshine pulls out an apple pie out of the oven, Soren's green eyes widen at the crusty pie, drool dripping down the sides of his mouth. Starshine and Airborne both notice his fixated gaze at the apple pie. Soren leans over and takes a big whiff of the pie, saying, "Is this an apple pie?" Bailout, Airborne, and Starshine all look at each other, then at Soren, with Starshine saying, "I take it you like apple pie, Soren?" Soren looks at them and replies, "Like? I love it!" Soren pounces on the pie and smashes his head into the pie tin, devouring the delicious pie, sending crusty bits of it all over the walls and onto Airborne, Bailout, and Starshine, who roll on the floor laughing. After breakfast, Soren and Bailout walk around Airborne's home while Starshine pulls out bits of apple pie out of her mane and tail upstairs. Sitting in the living room of Airborne's home, Soren says, "Sorry about the mess in the kitchen, Airborne. It's been forever since I've had a good apple pie." Airborne leans back on the sofa, saying, "Don't worry about it. I'm just glad someone appreciates Starshine's cooking as much as I do." From upstairs, Starshine yells, "I heard that, Airborne." Soren chuckles and says, "So, Rainbow Dash told me you're related to Lightning Dust and Thunderlane." Airborne replies, "Yeah, they were my great-grandparents. Both of them died during the war. Did you know them?" Soren shakes his head. "I think I met Lightning Dust once in Canterlot during the war. She was on leave from the front. She was eating at a restaurant in Canterlot with a charcoal-gray Pegasus. I happened to bump into them as they left. Unfortunately, that was the only time I can recall meeting her, but I did hear stories of her actions on the battlefield, saving ponies' lives even at the risk of her own. So I'm guessing she was pretty brave." Airborne nods. "I guess she was. I wish I could have known her before she died. But I'm not the only pony who's lost someone during the war. Did you lose any pony, Soren?" Soren looks at the old Wonderbolt poster, saying, "I lost a lot of comrades during the war. My family was in Cloudsdale when the city was destroyed. It's funny, really, after all this time I can barely remember their faces or the sound of their voices. Time seems to have erased them and the pain I felt after they died. But somehow, I feel they're still with me in some weird way." As Starshine comes downstairs, about a dozen knocks are heard at the front door. Opening it, Firestreak, Mistyfly, Fleetfoot, and Spitfire tumble into the entryway. Looking at them, she says, "What are you guys doing here?" Spitfire untangles herself from the pile of ponies and says, "We heard we can get a decent meal here." Starshine snorts, saying, "And who told you that?" "And who told you that?" Firestreak says, "Bailout told us you were an incredible cook, and after both he and Soren left the mess hall, we tried the food there. Needless to say, Wonderbolt food hasn't improved since we were gone. I think they even had some of our old rations stocked up in the freezer. So we decided we weren't going to eat the nasty stuff and came here instead." Starshine looks angrily over at Bailout, who pins his ears back as he peers over the edge of the couch. Starshine shakes her mane and says, "Fine, I'll cook us all lunch." As Spitfire trots into the kitchen, she notices the bits of apple pie stuck to the wall, saying, "I see you've discovered Soren's apple pie thing." Airborne replies, "Yes, indeed. I didn't know any pony who had such a love for apple pie." As Soren trots in, Airborne and Spitfire look at him. He replies, "What? Apple pie is awesome." After lunch, Soren takes all Equestrian from Airborne's gun locker and into the range inside of Airborne's home, saying, "Figured I'd shoot the old girl one more time. Besides, it'll give me a chance to improve my rusty skills." Firestreak and Fleetfoot watch a movie on Airborne's private terminal screen in the living room while Mistyfly and Bailout sit reading through the books on the shelves in the small library in Airborne's home. Spitfire and Airborne go over some of the finer details of the plan to attack Coltopolis, while Starshine listens to them talk. Airborne looks at a map of the layout of Coltopolis, saying, "Most of these streets have been filled with rubble. Making their way through them is going to be difficult. I imagine that the Red Remnant has also placed snipers into every building between the outskirts of the city and their headquarters. So that will mean clearing every house before we can get to the city center." Starshine gestures to the rough map of the city's sewers, saying, "Couldn't we just use the sewers like we did in Mareston to bypass the snipers?" Spitfire replies, "We could, but that would mean having to find our way through those endless passageways before we could get to the right building. Although, we could place charges underneath some of the buildings to collapse them, so the amount of snipers we'd face at street level would be significantly reduced." Airborne replies, "Well, that would give the ponies on the ground some advantage, while we take out any of the guards on the rooftops." Starshine replies, "Just how many ponies are inside of Coltopolis anyways?" Spitfire pulls out a sheet of paper from her saddlebag and places it on the countertop, saying, "From what intel we've gathered between Rainbow Dash's and Fluttershy's scout reports, we're looking at a force between 900 to 1,500 ponies. It's going to be a lot of bloodshed once we step hoof inside of there. All these narrow streets and buildings provide an ample place to hide, so we'll have to watch our flanks when we go in there." Airborne says, "Agreed. But I'm sure we'll have enough ponies and griffins on our side to even things out." Airborne and company leave his home and head towards the academy. When they arrive, the place is in a flurry of activity. Various Pegasi preparing for battle by loading their battle saddles or finding their respective squads. At the center of all the activity stands Rainbow Dash directing the ponies. Spitfire trots over to Rainbow Dash and discusses with her the revised plan of attack. While they wait for Rainbow Dash to give the signal to move out, Airborne is approached by several recruits standing in brand new armor. He notices that most of them look unsure how to use their battle saddles. One of the recruits, a pony named Cloudbucker, looks at Airborne, saying, "Sir, what do you think our chances of getting into Coltopolis in one piece?" Airborne replies, "Don't worry, we'll all make it out in one piece. Just watch your crosshairs and don't take any chances." Rainbow Dash gets onto a podium and says, "Can I have every pony's attention? Now look, I know for most of you, this will be your first time in combat, and that you are plenty nervous about it. Heck, who wouldn't be, right? But I'm telling you now that you have no reason to be nervous. We are all going to watch each other's backs when we enter Coltopolis, and I promise you that we will all come back alive. So let's show Equestria what we Pegasi are made of. Move out!" Rank after rank of Pegasi leap over the exit drop-off. Rank after rank of Pegasi leap over the exit drop-off down into the skies of Equestria. As Airborne prepares to leave, he sees Soren walk up to Rainbow Dash, saying, "Before we go, it's time I fulfilled my promise to you." Kneeling before her, he presented her with a ring with her cutie mark carved into it, saying, "I know this should have happened a long time ago, and I regret never asking you to marry me sooner. And I know it would have been the end of the world, but I figured if we both died down there, that at least we would die together as husband and wife. So will you honor me, Rainbow Dash, by becoming my bride?" Rainbow Dash looks at him, speechless, then replies, "Of course, Soren. I was hoping you remembered your promise to me after all these years." Soren slips the ring onto Rainbow Dash's armored barding, and she kisses him, saying, "Now let's make sure we both come back from this alive, so we can have a really awesome party." She kisses Soren, and they both leap off the edge together, and into the great blue skies of Equestria below, with Airborne following close behind them. Arriving below in the dusty wastes of Equestria, Fluttershy watches the stream of brightly polished Pegasi make their way towards her compound. At the head of many formations flies Rainbow Dash and Soren. Descending, the many Pegasi ponies land inside of the courtyard. Soren notices a large griffin standing at Fluttershy's side with a massive multi-barreled chain gun strapped to her back. Trotting up to the griffin, he says, "That's a pretty impressive gun you got there. My name's Soren. I'm glad you're on our side." He holds his hoof out to the griffin, who shakes it, saying, "My name is Hawkbeak. You must be Soren of the Wonderbolts that I've heard so much about. Hopefully, having your team on our side will put the fear of Celestia into those red-eyed remnant foals." Rainbow Dash trots over and hugs Fluttershy, saying, "So, you gonna partake in the action today, Fluttershy?" Fluttershy shakes her head no, saying, "As much as I want these red remnant bullies dealt with, I cannot raise a gun to kill them. But I will be with you in spirit instead." Hawkbeak sees Airborne, saying, "Good to see you, Sky Splinter. How are you?" Airborne raises an eyebrow, saying,
"Sky Splinter? Where did that name come from?"
Hawkbeak waves a claw at her men, saying, "That's the name they gave you after the explosion of that massive ship you destroyed split the sky. So I decided it was a fitting name. And you're now known as Sky Splinter to every pony we come across out here." Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, the Wonderbolt, Hawkbeak Airborne, and his friends discuss what the final plan of assault on Coltopolis will be. Looking at a large map of the city laid out on a table inside of Fluttershy's home, Spitfire says,
"All right, so we're all agreed on the final plan?"
Everyone nods, with Rainbow Dash saying, "So, I will lead Team 1 and approach the city from the west, while Spitfire and the Wonderbolts approach from the south. Our job is to clear the rooftops and keep the Red Remnant snipers focused on us, while Airborne and his team infiltrate the sewers to plant the charges. After they detonate, Half-Hoof will lead Fluttershy's forces in a ground assault on the city, while Hawkbeak and her talons swarm the skies with reinforcements." Airborne looks around the table for Half-Hoof and spots the ponies standing in the corner of the room. The pony's right forehoof from the knee down is missing and has been replaced with a cybernetic leg. The pony's right forehoof from the knee down is missing and has been replaced with a cybernetic leg. His body is covered in heavily scarred armor, and he wields 2 shotguns painted with the words "Fire" and "Death" onto the barrels. Fluttershy looks at all of her friends, saying, "Let's hope the goddesses are with us and keep us safe." As the rest of the ponies leave the room, Airborne stays, looking at the map of Coltopolis, trying to remember every street and building. Behind him, Starshine stands. Turning to see her, he says,
"What's up?"
She replies,
"Airborne, after all of this is over, I was wondering if you..."
She stops, in mid-sentence, and her face blushes deeply. He raises an eyebrow and says,
"After all this is over, Starshine, I promise I will marry you if that's what you're asking."
She nods her head, still blushing, saying,
"Thanks, Airborne. Now let's get this done."
The both of them trot together and join the other ponies for the assault on the ruins of Coltopolis. End of Chapter 4.